Today we are going to create this cool website together. This website has this navigation bar with this cool hover effect. We have a rocket at the left as well as some information at the right and two buttons right here. We also have the possibility to navigate to our socials at the left bottom. Once we click on a nav item, we are basically scrolling down to the selected section. Here we have an About Us section with some icons that shows what our company is doing. We also have some plans down below with a flippable card where you can hover over the card to flip it around and get some more information. At the bottom we have a contact form that allows us to contact the company and a button that allows us to send the contact form. At the bottom we also have our navigation bar, so once we click on About Us we are also scrolling to the About Us page. And this is all we are going to do with only HTML and CSS in this tutorial. So let's go, guys. So let's get started by creating our index.html file, and inside of this index.html file we're going to generate a basic template. Our website title is going to be Rocket, for example, and we subdivide our body into a header as well as a main section and a footer at the bottom. Now we're going to save the website and we're going to open our website with the live server. And now our website is basically still empty. So we're going to create a style shield with the name style.css, and we link the style shield to our index.html file by using link:/CSS, which links our style shield. So now let's go to our style shield and use the universal selector to give our document a margin of 0, a padding of 0, and box sizing of border box. Now we are also going to target the header, and our header should basically have a width of 100%, a height of 100 viewport height, and we are also going to use a background, and the background color is basically inside of this info.txt file. We're going to copy this code, this hash code, and we use this one for our background color. Now we are going to save the document and we'll open our page and we have this background. So let's get started by styling our navigation bar inside of the header, and we are going to start by using the nav element, and inside of this nav element we create an anchor tag, and the first anchor tag should be our home page. Then we will also have about, we are going to have a services section, and we are going to have a contact section. Now we're going to save the document, and right now it basically looks like this, which is obviously terrible. So we are going to style our navigation bar. First of all, we go into our style shield. We are going to create a class that has the name .text-color, which will be the text color that we are going to use for the text. And I'm going to copy this text color also from our info.txt file, like so, and I'm going to paste it after color in there. So now we have a text color. I'm also going to use going to create the class of _none, and we'll define the style text decoration of none right here. So I'm going to use _none and text-color to create the text color and the text decoration for my anchor text. So I'm going to say class equals _none and text-color. And now our anchor tag should have the desired color and also the desired underline. Maybe we can also use .bold, which should create font weight of bold, and we are going to use font-md, .font-md as a class, which will have a font size of 20 pixels. We are also going to create .font-lg, which will have a font size of maybe 30 pixels. We are also going to incorporate a different font family, which will be Roboto. So we're going to Google Fonts and search for Roboto. Roboto is going to be the font that we are going to use. So we're going to click on Get Font to get the font. Obviously, we now need to click on Get Embed Code. And now we're going to copy this style shield and insert those links into our header of our index.html file. We're going to save it. So now we are able to use the font family Roboto. And now we can use the font family Roboto for our entire body by defining this inside of our style shield by saying body gets the font family of Roboto. Now our fonts should basically all have the font family of Roboto, as you can see right here. Obviously this still doesn't really look too good, so I'm also going to use font-md and bold. to take a look at it. And now you can see it's slightly bigger and also has a different font family and a different font weight. But actually I think bold doesn't really look too good, so I'm going to remove this. Also I'm going to use capital letters for this, and now it looks like this, which is a lot better in my opinion. I'm also probably going to create dot letter spacing, and I'm going to use letter spacing of maybe 0.4 characters. And I'm going to copy this class and use this class for our anchor tag as well. But maybe it is a little bit too much, so I'm going to go with 0.2, or I'm going to test it. Still not perfect, 0.1 probably. And yeah, looks a lot better to me. Still not perfect, but I think we can test this later on. So I'm going to copy this class right here and going to give the same class to all of the other anchor tags to have the exact same effect. And now I'm also going to write those ones in capital letters, services and contact. We're going to save it, and now it looks like this. Obviously still not perfect, so we're going to use a flex box right now. We're going to say let's use .flex to create a display of flex. Let's create a class that has justify minus center to create justify content of center. And let's create a class of gap minus 2 to create a gap of 20 pixels. So now let's use the class flex justify center and gap minus 2 for our navbar. And now we have our items centered and inside of a flex box. So this looks a lot better already. Obviously there's still not enough space to the top. And I think we can create a margin on the y-axis by using .my minus 2 to create a margin top of 20 pixels and a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And now we are going to see how this basically looks by using my2. And this should probably be padding instead of margin. That was my bad. So we're going to use padding right here and padding bottom as well. And now we're going to replace my with py, and we should get this effect. And this already looks a little bit better. Maybe there's still not enough space. So I'm probably even going to try p3 of 30 pixels. 30 pixels, and I'm also going to add p4 in case we are going to need p4 later on, or in case we want to test p4 as well. Now I think I'm actually even going to test py minus 4 first of all, and this is probably a little bit too much, so I'm going to go with py3, and I think this looks kind of right. Actually, I'm maybe even going with py4, and if it doesn't look too good later on, I'll just change that. Also for the gap, I'm probably going to add .gap minus 4 to have a gap of 40 pixels, because I think this could actually look pretty good. And I'm going to use gap 4 here, and now we basically have this style. Maybe gap 4 is still not enough. Maybe I'm actually even going to try something completely different, like gap minus 8, and we're going to use 80 pixels here, because this is like really a lot, but maybe this looks pretty good, especially on desktop device. And I think this is actually kind of right, so I'm going to go with this design. So now we want our rocket at the left, and we want our information about the page at the right, so basically heading and so on. So let's go and do that. Right below our navbar, we are going to create another div, and inside of this div, we have one div that includes our image, and our image is going to be the rocket. So we're going to go into our images folder and we select rocket.jpg. And now we're going to create a second div, and for now, I'm just going to use an h1 that says learn rocket science, for example. So now we have this giant rocket at the left, and this one is right here at the bottom, which is obviously not what we're looking for, but we can change this in a second. And in order to do so, we are going to create a class that will be the class of grid, and we're going to create a class that has grid minus auto. And now we're going into the style sheet to create those classes, and I'm going to say .grid is basically just going to set display to grid, while .grid minus auto is going to create grid template columns. I'm going to repeat as many times as it's basically needed, so I'm going to use autofit to decide this automatically. And now I'm going to use min max. The minimum width for a column should be 250 pixels. And the maximum width is basically 1 FR. So if you have space, take up 1 FR of the available space. Otherwise, once you get below 250 pixels, just get the item in the next row, basically. So now we have those items aligned next to each other. But the rocket is obviously way too big, so I'm going to create a .rocket class to say we want to have a width of maybe 500 pixels for our rocket on our desktop device. Obviously, when we use another device, we probably have to use media queries to adjust the width. And maybe 500 pixels is just not enough, so I'm probably going to go with 800 pixels for a desktop device. And as you can see, I think this looks actually pretty cool. So I'm going to use that one. So now I'm going to go into our index.html, and I'm probably just going to replace this with learn science. And now it looks like this. And obviously, maybe I want to have a different type of text, a different font size. So I'm actually also going to add .font minus XL, which will have a font size of 40 pixels. And I'm also going to add .font minus XXL, which is going to have a font size of 80 pixels. And now I'm probably going to use a class of font minus XXL, and I'm going to take a look at it. And I'm going to save the document XXL instead of XLL, and now we have this effect. Probably I'm going to try a different kind of font size, font weight, and instead of using bold, I'm going to create .thin, and I'm going to use font weight of lighter. Now I'm going to add this class to our h1 and see how this looks. And now we have this effect. Maybe instead of thin, I'm going to use 300 though. So now it looks like this. Let's go with 400. 400 should be normal. Okay, that's still not perfect. So I'm going to go maybe with 600. Okay, that's probably not thin anymore. I'll just keep 300. And I'm also going to create another style that has the font size semi-bold, which is going to be 600. And I think for our heading, I'm going to create semi-bold, and I'm also going to use the color, which is text minus color for the text. And now we have this effect. And in my opinion, this looks pretty much all right. So we are now going to create some buttons and some more text. But first of all, I want to add to our grid classes, I want to create .grid minus center, and I will use place items center. And now I'm going to use .grid center, and I'm going to use this class for our grid to center our items in the center of each cell. So if this is a cell, it will take this item and center it in the middle of the cell. So we're going to save this. And as you can see, our items are now centered. And this is exactly what I was looking for. So the next step would probably also to use some more margin at the top right here. So that is something I'm going to create as well. So I'm going to use mt-8 to create a margin top of 80 pixels. And I'm going to use mt8 for our entire grid class. So I'm going to use mt8 right here. So it looks like this. In addition to this, I'm also going to create w-80, and I'm going to generate this class, and I'll say .w-80 is going to define a width of 80%. And now let's go into our index.html, and I'm going to center those 80% instead of a flex box. So this box basically takes up 80% of the available space. And by saying this has a class of flex and justify of center, I'm saying that those 80% are going to be centered in the middle of the page, like so. I think my rocket is also slightly, maybe a little bit too big. So I'm just going to go down there, and I'm going to say let's go with 600 pixels, or maybe 700. 600 is a little bit too small, and I think this looks pretty much all right. So we are going to use that one. Maybe 750. Come on. Yeah, this looks pretty good to me. So now at the right side, I want to have some more text, and this text should basically be thin. So I'm going to use an H2 right below our H1, and I'm going to say learn, or the fastest way to learn anything about science. And now I'm going to use a class of thin. I'm going to use thinner for this one, and I'm going to use maybe a font size of either large or medium. This one was think. So I'm going to use thin right here. Going to save this one. Okay, I changed this one to 300 and now it seems to work. So maybe the font is a little bit too small, so we can probably try font minus MD and take a look, and this is even smaller, so we're going to use font minus LG for a larger font. And this looks pretty much all right. Maybe the text is a little bit too long. We're just going to remove this, and now it should be all right. So now let's create a get started button and a learn more button, for example. So we are basically going to create a button of type button, and this one says get started, and the second one says learn more, for example, or this one could say about us, and the other one says learn more. So now we have those two buttons, which are really looking terrible. So we are going to define a general button style for both of these buttons, and then we use two different classes to define the background colors and the style of our button. So first of all, we're going to create the general button style for a button, and we are going to say that a button has a padding of 10 pixels top bottom and maybe 40 pixels left right. And a button has a border radius of maybe 10 pixels, a cursor of pointer, and a white space of no wrap. Now we can use this button class and give our button class, or both of our button classes, this class dot button. And now we basically have those basic button styles, still looking terrible, so we are going to adjust this. I also think that we are now going to create dot button light, and we are going to create dot button dark. So we have a light and a dark button, and our light button will have this background color, and the other one is going to have the other background color. So we'll use background, hashtag, and this color. And for the other one, we are going to use the dark button color, which is also in my info.txt. So we use background, hashtag, and now we have this background color. So let's also use text color, which should also just be the text color from our info.txt, which is hashtag, whatever. And here we are actually going to use the exact same color. So we save this. And now we can give our left button the button dark class, for example, and the other one is going to get the button light class. So we now have one light and one dark button, which should look like this once we save. And I also don't really like the border, so we're going to get rid of this one for both of these styles. And I'm also removing the border inside of button dark and button light twice. And I think first of all, I'm also going to use about us written capital and learn more written capital. And now I have those styles, and now I might also use a slightly bigger font weight. Maybe I'm going to try 400. 400 is normal, so I'm going to try 600. 600 looks a little bit better to me, so I'm going to go with 600, and a font size of maybe, let's try 20 pixels. That's way too big, so we're going to try 16 probably. 16 is a little bit better, but yeah, still too big to me, so I'm going to use 500 right here. Yeah, let's go with 600 and a font size of 15. And I'm also going to use a letter minus spacing of 0.1 characters. And now we have this effect, which is okay to me. We're going to save this, we're going to paste this in right here, and now we have this effect as well. And now we obviously would need some margin to the top for both of our buttons. So we're going to wrap our buttons inside of a div. We are going to say we want to use the class mt, let's say 20 pixels. We don't have this class yet, so we're going to create mt2 for a margin top of 20 pixels. Now we have this margin. Now we also might want to use a gap between those buttons. So we're going to use flex and gap -2 for those buttons as well. And now we have this effect. And I think this looks pretty much all right. And maybe we should also change the general button style, because probably we have a little bit too much padding right here, and maybe we can add some padding right there. Let's go to 12 pixels. And I think this looks kind of all right. So let's go ahead, and once we hover over the button, let's turn the light button into a dark button and vice versa. So we're going to use button -light. And now we're going to say, once we hover, we're just going to paste the dark button effects in here, or we're just going to say, okay, background should probably be different. So we're going to do this. So now we have this effect. And I'm also going to add a transition, all E 0.5 seconds and ease. And now we have this transition, which is kind of cool to me. And now we can do the exact same thing for our dark button by going dot button -dark colon hover. And we are going to copy the background color of our light button. We're going to paste it in here, and we'll set our transition to all 0.5 seconds ease. And now we should have the exact same effect for the other button, just with a different color. So now let's go ahead and create two boxes right below this div. I'm going to create a div, and inside of this div I'm going to create another div that has the class of box. Inside of this box I'm going to create another h2, and this one says, for example, why us question mark, and then we have a paragraph, lorem, maybe 15 words. And now we will just use the exact same box a second time, and we'll probably have our offer. And now we have those two boxes right here, which are still looking terrible and are actually not even in the right place, if you want to say so, because we want to paste them in right above our buttons, because it obviously belongs into this section. So let's go and style our cards. First of all, let's go to our .card section, give it a background color of our light button. So we are just going to copy this background color. Let's also use a padding of maybe 15 pixels, a border radius of maybe 10 or 15 pixels. And now let's take a look at them. They are still looking terrible because somehow okay, I don't have box, I have card. So yeah, I'm just going to rename this one to box, and now the styles should be applied. As you can see, they basically are. Let's also use a width for our boxes because they're way too big and I don't want them to be that big. So I'm going to use probably 150 pixels like so. And this is maybe a little bit too narrow, so I'm going to go with 180 pixels. And I also want to have a slightly smaller font. So I'm going to use class of font -md for that one. And this looks a little bit better. And now I'm also going to create .font -sm because I want to have a pretty small font for our text inside of the class. So I'm going to rename md to sm, and I'll say we want to have 15 pixels for our small font, for example. And I use font -sm for our paragraph. And now it basically looks like this. Also, I think I'm going to go with thin. And now we have those thinner texts. I also think the placeholder text is a little bit too much, so you gotta keep it a little bit shorter right here. Let's also add a margin top to our paragraph of maybe mt1. We also have to create .mt1 by copy and pasting that one, and we'll say we want to have 10 pixels of margin to the top. So now we have a little bit of margin. I also think inside of our box we could use some more padding, maybe of 30 pixels. And I think this looks a lot better. Maybe 30 is just a little bit too much. Maybe we're going to use 20. And I think this looks a lot better already. So let's go and create the exact same box once again. So we're just going to replace that box with the other box. And now we should have the exact same box. We are going to say our offer right here, and inside of this div I want to use class flex and gap -2. So now our boxes should look pretty good, and we obviously also need a margin top of maybe, let's use MT3. So we're going to create MT3 for now and say those are 30 pixels to the top, and now we have this effect. So now we also have those boxes. And actually, I think it would probably look a little bit better even if our box would be slightly bigger. So we're going to try that, 250 pixels, for example. And let's just add some more text. So we're going to use lorem 5, and we're again going to use lorem 5 to create some more placeholder text. And this might be a little bit too much, 220, so this is just like testing a little bit, and I think this looks pretty good. So this is what our website could look like. So now we are also going to add a cool hover effect and a cool selected effect for our anchor text inside of our navbar. So we're going to go into our navbar, and this one should have an href to the index.html file, so I'm going to use this one, and now we are going to go to our navbar anchor tag and select every anchor tag that has the href equals index.html attribute. We are going to say that we want to have a background of white, and actually this one should be alright. We're going to style the rest in a different way. We give every single element a padding of 10 pixels top bottom, 15 pixels left right, and a border radius of 30 pixels. For most elements this is going to be invisible, but for those elements with a background it will be visible. So maybe I'm also like going to use 25 and 8 pixels right here. So now this is the effect, and now we want to use, maybe I think 25 is a little bit too much, I'm going to use 20. This one looks pretty good, and now I'm going to create a hover effect on every single nav element. And now our nav element, once we hover, will have a background of white as well. So now this is what it basically looks like. And I also think the gap is a little bit too much now since we added some padding as well. So I'm going to change our gap of 8 to gap of 6. And obviously we need to create a gap of 6 and add the class for that purpose. So I'm going to use gap -6. And this is going to have 60 pixels. And now we have this effect. And I think this navbar looks pretty good already. So let's also add our social icons at the left bottom. And we can do so by going to the bottom of our header. And we are going to say we are going to create a div for our socials. Now we are going to create an anchor inside. And inside of this anchor, we'll use an image. And this image is basically pointing to our images folder, and we're going to start with our instagram.svg. We're going to save this. We'll give our image a class of socials -icon, because there's going to be the socials icon. I'm going to go inside of our style shield, and I'm going to target our .socialIcons class. I'm going to say this one has a width of 50 pixels. And now it looks like this. Maybe 50 is actually a lot. And we are going to try 30 like this. And this looks pretty good to me. And now we are also going to create some more icons by duplicating this anchor tag. Maybe the second one is for youtube.svg and the third one is for discord.svg. And now we could also say that our socials container, we're going to save this. We have those 3 icons. And now we could, for example, say that our socials container, our header, first of all, has a position of relative, and our .socials will have a position of absolute, to position it absolute to our container. And let's say we have bottom 0, left 0. So now we have this effect. I'm also not entirely sure why we have this weird border at the bottom, because usually this should not be the case. Also, for our anchor text, we're going to use target equals underline blank. We're going to take this one and give this attribute to our other two anchor texts as well. And now we are going to go into our style sheet, and let's say we want to use 20 pixels left and 20 pixels bottom, and we'll use opacity of maybe 0.6. And now we have this effect. Okay, this seems to be a reason because our anchor texts have an underline, so I'm going to target our socials, and every anchor inside of our socials I'm going to say text decoration of none. So now they're basically removed, and now we have this effect. I still think this doesn't really look perfect, so I'm maybe going to go with 15 pixels and 15 pixels. I'm also going to create maybe more opacity. Maybe I'm going to use 0.8. Instead of 30, I'm going to use 34 pixels. And now this looks a little bit better. I'm also going to, maybe I'm going to use 0.3 to just make a subtle effect. Maybe even 0.2. Obviously you can choose cooler icons. They're not like a 10 out of 10, but to me they look kind of right, so I'm going to try and use them. I'm also going to go into our index.html. I'm going to use a flexbox and a gap of maybe 1. I don't think that we have this gap yet, so we're going to create gap -1, and we'll say that this gap has 10 pixels of gap. So now we have this effect. We removed the other class, which was the socials class, which should obviously not happen, and now this should work. And actually I think 30 pixels for the individual socials is probably a little bit too much, so I'm going to use 30. And I think this looks kind of right. Also the gap might be a little bit too big, so I'm just going to remove those classes as well. And I think this looks pretty much alright. And this is the finished site. So now let's go ahead and create the about section. First of all, we create a short comment that says this is the about section, and now we are going to create a section for our about section. Inside of the section, we are going to start by using an h2, and this h2 can say, for example, about us, for example. And now we are going to use font, or change the font size basically. We are going to say let's use font -XXL. And now we have this giant font. Maybe this is a little bit too big, so we're going to take a look if we have font -XL already, and we do have font -XL already, so we're going to delete one of the X's, and now we have this font. We are going to use text -center. I'm not sure if we have this class already, but I don't think we have this class, so we are going to create it by using .my.textCenter, and we use text align center. I'm also going to going to save the document again, and now we have this one centered. I'm also going to create a py of 8 .py -8, which will have a padding top of 80 pixels and a padding bottom of 80 pixels, and we're going to use py 8 for our section to have some space to the top and some space to the bottom. So this looks pretty good. Now right below our h2 we are going to start to create our icon cards, if you want to say so, and this one will have an icon at the top, so I'm going to use image. The source is going to point to our image folder, and let's probably start by using a rocket, for example. We're going to save this, and this is what it looks like. Or basically that was the run rocket. I don't want to use this one. I want to use image/shuttle png, for example. And yeah, this was the shuttle that I wanted to use. Right below this, I want to use an h3 that could say, for example, our mission again, and then we use a p tag that describes this within a couple of words. So let's say 20 words, for example. And now we have this effect. Now let's also go into our style sheet and take a look at our flexbox. We should probably create a class that says flex-column, which changes the flex direction to column. And now we should also probably use .items -center to create align items center. So now we are going to use a flex box for this div. We're going to say class flex. The flex direction is going to be column, and we want our items to be centered. So now it should look like this. And now let's also say we want to use text minus center to center our text as well. Obviously the rocket is way too big, so we're going to use a class for our about minus icons. And now I'm going to target this class inside of our style shield as well by saying dot about icon, and we'll have a width of maybe 50 pixels. And now this looks pretty cool to me. Now it would be pretty nice to have a margin at the top as well. So we are probably going to take a look at our MTs, and let's say we want to have margin top of 2, for example. At least we are going to try it. Maybe we're not going to use it later on, but we'll take a look at the look basically. So let's say MT2, and now we have a little gap right here, and I think this one looks actually pretty much alright already. So now we might go ahead and just copy this container. And let's also use a comment right above to say, okay, this here's icon card, for example. Now we're going to use one icon card. We'll place this icon card instead of 2 divs, and we'll duplicate our icon card 4 times. Now I want to have a div that has a class of grid because we want to create a grid, and this grid should also be grid minus auto. And now we have this grid layout. I would also appreciate to use gap minus 2 to create a little gap between our items. And now I think it already looks pretty good. We should probably also use W minus 80 to say this should only take up 80% of the available space. And now we are going to center this entire container that takes up 80% of the space by using class flex and justify center. And now we have those items centered. Obviously it would be pretty cool to also use some more margin to the top. So I'm going to see if I already have a class of mt minus 8, and I think we've created that one already, and this one looks pretty good to me. So now let's also replace those images, and we can do so by, instead of image slash shuffle, we can say image slash books. Now let's also say image slash game controller, game controller, and right here we can say image slash, let's use global for example. And now we have those different icons, and now we should probably also change the way our text looks. I'm not sure if a margin top of 10 right here would be pretty good, so I'm going to take a look at it, and I'm going to say, okay, paragraph MT1, and let's probably say we use M font of medium and see how this looks like. Medium is too big. I'm going to try small right here. And yeah, this one looks pretty nice as well, but I actually prefer this style here, so I'm probably going to remove MT1 and going to see how it looks with a smaller font. But I'm not really a fan of this as well, so I'm just going to remove this one again and just going to keep it as it is. And this looks pretty good to me. So now I'm just going to fill out those different text placeholders. And now all of those fields are basically filled out, and we have this effect, and it looks like this. So let's go ahead and create our services section, and we can do so by creating a new section right below the one we already have. And I'm also going to copy our H2 in this section right here. So we already have a template. We are going to say, okay, this one is our services section, and now we'll close the section right here by doing so, and we have this effect. So this section is right below the section above, but this one will also have a background color, and maybe I'm going to create a class for this one, which is probably .bg bright, for example, and I'm going to say, okay, this one has a background of this color, and now once I use the class bg minus bright for the service, for example, it should have a background color as well. And now it showed, and as you can see, we now have this background right here. And maybe we should also use different colors for those headings as well as for those text styles. So we can do so by using, for our section, text minus color. And obviously the same goes for this section. Here we are going to use text minus color as well. And now we should have this font color. And as you can see, we do. So now let's focus on creating different cards. And I would really like to create flippable cards, for example. So what we are going to do is we're going to create a .card div. Instead of this .card div, we have a .inner div. Instead of this .inner div, we have a .front div. And here is some text. And now we will also have a .back div. Here is the back. And we will basically have a card. This card will have a front page and a back page. And we're going to start by styling the front and the back of this page. So let's go and say .front, .back. This one will have a padding of probably 40 pixels. We're also going to use on our .card, we will use position of relative. On our front and our back, we are going to use position of absolute. And right here, we're going to save this one. And we'll take a look. So we basically have this text, and this text basically overlaps. So what we are going to do now is we're going to say our .back has a transform rotate Y of 180 degrees. And we're going to use back face visibility of 180 of hidden, which basically means once the back of our card shows, the text is visible, invisible, and once the front of the card shows, it is visible basically. And 180 degrees basically means we are turning our back card to the back, as the name implies, and we are going to rotate our entire inner section right now. So we're going to say everything inside of this inner section is going to rotate by 180 degrees once we hover over our card. So let's say .card. Once we hover over our card, we're going to target our .inner section, and this .inner section will basically be flipped or rotated on the y-axis by 180 degrees, which basically means now our back card is showing to the front and our front card is showing to the back. And since we have back face visibility, our set to hidden, our front card will get invisible and our back card will get visible, and vice versa. But as you can see, it somehow works, but it still looks weird, and our text, our back card is mirrored. So what we are going to do now is we're going to use instead of 0, first of all, we can use perspective for our card, but we need to go into .inner and we need to set transform style to preserve 3D, and maybe we are going to use perspective of 1000 pixels and place that one into inner as well. And now we have this effect, as you can see. It still looks pretty terrible, but yeah, definitely something we can work with. Now let's say our card has a max width of 250 pixels. By doing so, let's also use some more text so we can really see the difference. So let's use 20 characters, for example. And now as you can see, it basically looks like this. So what we can do now is we're going to go into our style sheet and we're going to use a height of fit content. And our .front and our back are going to take up 100% of the width and 100% of the height. And obviously the same goes for our .inner card. And now what we say, instead of fit content, we are going to say this one should probably take up 300 pixels by doing so. And now we have this card. Now let's also use a border of 1 pixel solid white for our card. So we have this border, and now let's say this border has a border minus radius of 15 pixels. Now we're also going to use a background of white. So now we have this white background, but I don't really want a white background. Instead, I want to use something that is almost fully transparent. So I'm going to use 0.1. So we have this slightly transparent background. So now I would also think that it is pretty cool if we would probably get a heading right here, probably an H3 that says basic plan, for example. So now we have a basic plan right here. And let's also create some form of a badge that displays the price for the plan, for example. So let's say, okay, we have a paragraph right below, this paragraph, so we're going to put this one inside of a paragraph, and now we have a second paragraph that says, whoops, my bad, that says that this one costs $9.99, for example, so the basic plan. And now let's also make this basic paragraph look a little bit better, so we give this one a class of button once again, and let's now say button minus, let's try out dark and see how this one looks, but I think this looks pretty bad, so I'm going to go with button minus white, and I'm going to create the style. So I go to dot button, we have button light, button dark, and maybe I'm also going to create a width, a max width of fit content. So now we can probably try our button out again. Let's use button light, for example, and see how this one looks. And now let's use button dark once again. But yeah, I don't really think that this one looks too good, so I'm going to use a white one. So now I'm going to create button or badge. I'm going to create a badge, and this badge will have a padding. I'm just going to copy probably a little bit from the bottom. I'm going to say padding 1220. I'm also going to say white space is no wrap. I'm going to say that I'll have a border radius of 30 pixels. And now I'm going to create dot badge minus white, which will say the background is basically white and the color is basically this color right here for the text, like so. And now I'm going to use badge and badge white on my badge, if you want to say so. Now we're going to save the document, and we have this white badge. Maybe it also makes sense to use max width of fit content, since this would probably look a little bit better. And now it might also make sense to probably go into our index page. So now we have this front page, and now let's probably say we are going to put those two into a div, and this paragraph can stay there. And now let's say we have a flex box, we use flex column, and let's use justify between, because I wanna justify space between basically. So I have to generate this class. So I'm going to copy justify center. I'm going to create justify between instead of center, and now I use justify content space between to create some space between. I'm going to copy this class, and I'm going to paste my class in here, and now there should basically be space between our content if there's space available, but right now it shouldn't be available since our box is probably not big enough. So what I can do is I can say that I want to use a height of maybe 500 pixels just for the purpose of checking this out, and as you can see, it somehow seems to work, but obviously it's a little bit too much, so I'm going to use maybe 400, and now I have this badge right here at the bottom that shows the price. And I think this is a little bit cooler. Also, this one is like, I think the text is like way too small, so I'm going to go ahead and create a class of font minus LG, for example. Now I have this basic plan right here. Maybe it would even make sense to use text minus center. Now it's probably centered. I'm going to use text center for the paragraph as well. So we have text center for this one as well. And I'm also going to use MT, let's try 2, for example, and take a look at this. This is way too much, so I'm going to go with MT1, and now I have this paragraph. Actually, I gotta say I'm like really not too happy with the way the badge looks, so I'm probably going to remove flex and justify between and just take a look at this. And yeah, obviously like not the 10 out of 10, so I'm also going to remove text center again. And as you can see, there's like a lot of testing and trying different things until you find something that you really like. And I also think this one shouldn't be in the center, and by doing so, whoops, I've probably removed the wrong text center, and by doing so it looks a little bit better. I'm also going to give the badge a margin top of maybe 1 to give it some space to breathe. And yeah, in my opinion, it's not a 10 of 10, but obviously you can test a lot more and adjust this according to your needs. But for me, this is like completely fine right now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the exact same div can also actually remove this div, and I can also remove this div, and I can just take this front container basically and everything inside, copy this one, and now I can paste the same into our back container. And obviously once we hover over our container, nothing is going to happen. And the reason for this is that we still don't have a transition. So what we have to do is actually go to this class, set transition all ease or 0.5 seconds and ease. And now we should have a transition effect like so. Obviously, like, this border doesn't make too much sense when using it around our card. So what we are probably going to do is we're going to remove it right here. We're going to get it right here. And now, as you can see, we basically have those effects. What we can also do is we can remove our background right here. And now we would have this effect. So now it's like really a pretty cool effect. We can paste our background in here. Now we have this background right here. And now we could also say, okay, let's use a padding of maybe 40 pixels around our text. And now we have this padding. But as you can see, this really looks pretty weird, and the reason for this is that we probably need a width of, let's say, 400 pixels, because there's just not enough space for those cards to really work. Oops, 4000 is probably a little bit too much, so we have 400 right now. So this is what the plan now looks like, and I think this is already a lot better. So what we can do now is we are going to use the border radius of probably 15 pixels right here, and now our card looks pretty alright to me. And now to really get a 3D perspective, we need to delete it from .inner and we need to put it to our card element. And now this is what the card flip effect really looks like, and I think this is pretty cool. Maybe it doesn't make too much sense though to have the same backside as we have the foreside. So what we can, for example, say is we can probably go to .back and say what you get, for example, for our heading, what you get. And now we could, for example, tell the customer what he will basically get when buying this item. And maybe it's also cool to have a slightly different look. So what we could, for example, say is that for our .front and our .back, we'll use a different background. So I'm also going to use .back, and I overwrite the background with probably something that has a background opacity of 0.8. So now we have this effect, and it looks pretty cool in my opinion. We could also try to justify the content in the center by putting all of this inside of a div, and then we use flex column and justify center. So now our text is in the center. Let's also use text minus center, and this one looks pretty cool in my opinion now. So now we have this basic plan with the price and basic information, and now we could also add some information right here. So now let's duplicate our card a couple of times by saying, or by copying the entire card section. Let's say this here is one card, whoops. This here is a card, and right below we have an entire card. And we are going to copy this entire card and we'll paste it in a couple of times inside of two divs once again. So we have this div, we have this div, and inside of those divs we have 3 cards, for example, in this case. And now let's say the class for the surrounding div is grid auto w-80 once again, and we are going to save this. So now we have those plans. And now let's also say that this one has the class flex justify center to center our items. And now we basically have those elements right here. And we could probably say that the base or the second plan is not the basic plan, it's maybe the premium plan for probably 19.99, and the third plan is probably the pro plan for, let's say, 99.99, for example. So now we have 3 plans: basic, premium, and pro plan. And this would be definitely something that would be possible when it comes to different price sections. And as you can see, it's also like pretty responsive, but we should probably add a gap to our grid just for the purpose of making it a little more responsive, because now they are overlapping and this is obviously something. So we're going to add a gap of 2 pixels to this container. And now let's also say for our card, actually for our card, the width of 400 pixels is probably a little bit too much for small devices. So what we are going to do instead is use 300 pixels, because this should work on pretty much every device. And now we use 500 pixels for the height, and this should be pretty much all right. And now once they get close to each other, they're basically wrapping into the next line. And as you can see, this still looks pretty good on big devices. But one thing that we should also use is grid center to center our items inside of the grid, because right now they are pushed to the right or to the left. And now once we get to the center, we basically have this effect. And what we can do as well is we can basically say that for our card, we'll have a width of probably 500 pixels. And later on, when we, or let's say 400, later on when we get to styling for mobile, we can obviously change this. And we are also going to use grid auto, and we're going to create a second class that has grid auto minus large, which will use 400 pixels, because it should basically wrap into the next line a little bit earlier. Because if it waits up to 250 pixels, the grids are basically going to overlap. Hope this makes sense. Not entirely sure if you understood it, but you can also like just go ahead and ask ChatGPT if you didn't. But as you can see, now it's jumping into the next line pretty early, and this is exactly what we are basically looking for. So now we have this Pro plan, Premium plan, Basic plan, and it's also pretty responsive. So it works on every single device, as you can see. So let's go ahead and create a contact section next, right below this section. Let's say, okay, this is our contact section. We're going to create another section inside of this contact section. We can obviously copy the code we've used before for our padding and our text. So let's go ahead, let's just paste this in, and let's also create a closing tag for the section. And now we're going to save, and we have this About Us section, which should obviously be the contact section. And I also think the section above should be our plan section, for example. So we're going to rename that one as well. So let's go ahead and create a contact form by saying, okay, form. Inside of this contact form, we have a heading. This heading is not centered in our case. And let's use a class of contact minus form, or let's just say form minus container. Now we're going to target this form container, or we are first of all going to create some inputs. Let's say we have an input of type text that includes the name, has the ID name, and a placeholder of type name. Let's use another input for our email, so we can contact the customer, for example. And let's say name is name, ID is email, placeholder is email, and create another type input of type text. And let's say this one has topic, for example, name is topic and placeholder is topic. And let's now, for the last input field, create a text area that includes the message, or gives the user basically the option to create a message and send that to the company. And the last one is basically a button of class type button, basically. And we can, for example, say, we need a type for this one. Type is equal submit, obviously, and the class is button, and this button says send message, for example. And now we're going to save this, and as you can see, this should look quite terrible. So let's get ahead into our style sheet, and let's say dot form container has a width of 500 pixels, a padding of maybe 50 pixels, a border of 1. Or let's not use a border, let's use a border radius of 15 pixels, a box shadow of 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 15 pixels, and let's use black, but we're not going to use pure black, we're going to use a soft version or a transparent form of black. And now we should have this kind of form. Now let's also center our form by going into our form. Let's take the entire form, wrap this form inside of a div. This div will have a class of, let's use another div. And now inside of this other div, we have this form container. Actually, I don't think that we really need this div, but let's use flex right here and let's use justify center. I'm actually pretty much done, so I can't even think anymore. I don't know if we needed this one or not, but let's just use it. And now let's also start to target our input fields and make them look slightly better. So we're going to use target every input field inside of the form container. This one has a width of 100%, has a padding top, bottom of, or let's say a padding of 15 pixels into every direction. Border is going to be 0, outline is going to be 0, box shadow is going to be 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 15 pixels, RGBA. Let's use 0, 0, 0, 0.1. We're going to save that. We have those fields. Let's use border minus radius of probably, let's say, 10 pixels. So we have slightly rounded borders. Looks pretty good to me. Now let's also target our text area with the same styles, so text area, but we'll give this one a height of maybe 200 pixels, so we have some more space to write. And now we can obviously also create for the button a different style. So let's go ahead, let's use button light, but we are going to create, maybe we are going to create, or we can actually just use the buttons we already have, and instead of button, we are going to use button minus dark as well. And now we have this dark button to submit our form. Maybe we should also inside of our, actually this one is pretty unnecessary. We don't need this div if we're going to make this one the correct way. If we are going to use flex column, for example, this should actually already work. And now we can also go ahead and use, or actually this div was actually necessary. So we're going to use class flex column gap. Let's use gap 1. I don't know if we have this one defined already, but it seems like we don't. So we have to create, oh, actually we should have gap 1. So why isn't it working? Because like there should be a gap between our items right now. Okay. The reason for this is that we need to use all of those classes inside of our form. Like so. And now this one should work. Yeah, now we have the gaps. And now the form is actually pretty much done as well. So we can write a message, we can write a topic, an email, a name, and so on. But we obviously need to use a valid email right here. So now this works. So right now, the last thing we actually really need to add is a footer. So we can go ahead and create our footer really quick. I think we have the section inside of our footer though. So we need to go ahead and probably, delete this tag for the footer and this tag for the main section. And the main section needs to go to the bottom, and here we can actually close the footer like so. And now inside of the footer we are actually going to use for, let's say we are just going, oops, some of this does not seem to work. Actually I need an opening tag for the footer, so yeah, like this it should work. And now inside of the footer we'll have a div. Inside of this div we're going to have an anchor tag, and let's just say this anchor tag points to our pages again. So this is another navbar. We have a home, about, service, and contacts. So we'll have index.html. Let's say we have home. Let's create another anchor tag. Let's say this one points to about us. Now we have services, and now we have contact, for example. This goes inside of a flex box. We have a gap of 2, for example, and all of our anchor text will have a class of white text. Underline will be none. And now we can take a look at it. Our header, yeah, looks terrible, so we should probably, or let's say our footer, not our header, and let's start to style our footer. Let's say we want to have a background of RGB 26, 26, 26, now padding top 40 pixels, padding bottom 40 pixels, and let's save this, and now we have this effect. Now we obviously want to center our items by going in here, copy and pasting those classes to the other hrefs, and it seems like we don't even have white yet. Is this possible? Let's take a look. .white does not seem to exist, so we are going to create .white as a class, which is just going to set our color to white. So now we have this effect. Now let's also start to center our entire div by taking another wrapper div. This one has the class of flex and justify center. And now we have our items in the center and our footer is basically done. So this is the finished website. Obviously, there are some things we have to do right now. We need to make those ones here clickable so that they basically work. So let's go ahead and create or give every section an ID so we can create a scrollable effect or scroll effect for our navbar. So this one is obviously the contact bar. So we give this section an ID of contact. Our next section will have an ID for our cards basically. So let's say that one is basically services. So let's say ID equals services, and our last section will have an ID of about. So let's say ID equals about. So now we can basically use those IDs to create a scrollable bar. So we're going to go to our nav bar and we say this one goes to hashtag about, this one goes to hashtag services, and this one goes to hashtag contact. And if you take a look at this, this basically seems to work. About gets us to about us, services gets us to our plans, and contact gets us to the contact form. So we can do the exact same for our footer as well. We say hashtag about, hashtag services, and hashtag contact. And what we can do now is we are going to go into our style shield, into our universal select, and let's use scroll behavior of smooth, which will add a smooth transition to those jumps basically, as you can see. So now everything seems to work. And now let's go ahead and, yeah, obviously this here works as well. And now let's go ahead and make this website responsive. And there's not really a lot of stuff that we have to do to make it responsive, but some things are definitely necessary. So if we take a look and we're going to basically shrink our website, I would probably say once we get to 1500 pixels, this is definitely, yeah, a pretty big breakpoint, and it really starts to look kind of terrible. So from this point on, we should probably, yeah, make our rocket slightly smaller, so we can go ahead and start to do so. So we're going to create a media query by saying add media screen and max width of 1500 pixels. Whoops. And we can now say that we want to target our rocket that has a width of 750 pixels, which is definitely not necessary. So we can go down to probably 500 pixels for the rocket. And now let's go and as you can see, or as you probably can't see, I'm going to make this window slightly bigger. So once we get below 1500 pixels, it seems like our rocket is definitely not affected because we obviously need to target the width of 1500. And now, as you can see, our rocket gets a lot smaller once we get below 1500, and it would obviously also make a lot of sense to turn our text a little bit smaller. So what we're going to do, especially our H1 is way too big in this context in my opinion, but actually the entire section is a little bit too big. So what we can do under those circumstances is give this a little bit more space, since I think we have 80% right now for the entire section, but we could obviously change this and give this one a little bit more by saying, okay, we use an ID of header ID, for example. Now we're going to get this header ID, and once we get below, let's take a look at the breakpoint. Once we get below 1000, probably 100 pixels, let's say at media screen and max width 1100 pixels, we are going to target our header ID, and we are going to say this one should take up 90% of the available space. And as you can see, we now get a little bit more space. Let's probably say actually 96% to give it even a little bit more space. And as you can see, now it looks good up to probably, yeah, I would say probably up to 1000 pixels. So once we get to 1000 pixels, we're going to create another media query. And what we can basically do there is we can say that the rocket should go to the top and this one should go to the bottom. So in order to do so, we are again going to target our header ID, but this time we say display flex direction column. So now we basically have a column that includes all of our content, and we should probably also reduce the margin to the top slightly for our rocket, because our rocket probably takes up a little bit too much space. So we can go to our rocket and say what exactly, okay, our rocket, okay. So we have this margin top of 80 pixels for our header ID. So what we can do is basically say we want to have a margin top of 40 pixels, because I think this is enough. And right now let's also reduce the space the rocket takes up. So let's go to .rocket, say width 300 pixels, or let's say 400, because I think 300 is probably a little bit too low. And like this, it looks a lot better already. And now what I would also like to do is I would like to create text align of center for everything. So oops, this is probably the wrong container. So we're going to use text align of center for this one. And now everything is centered. Obviously our buttons and our containers are still missing, but I can take a look inside of the index.html, and to center those buttons and all of this stuff, we probably need to, okay, let's try to use justify, or let's use align items in the center. Okay, we basically need to take this box right here and we need to center the buttons inside of the box, or we need to center, yeah, we need to center the buttons inside of the box. So what we can basically do is we're going to give this section right here that includes the buttons an ID that is probably button container, and once we reach a certain width, which in our case is 1000 pixels, we are going to target this button container and we'll say justify content center. And now as you can see, our buttons are centered. Now what we can also do is we could say that we want to center those cards by taking a look at the container. So we basically have this box container, and we can also say let's give it an ID, and the ID is box minus container. And now in order to target this one, we are going to say okay, hashtag box container. We'll also have a justify content of center once we are below 1000 pixels. And now this content is basically centered as well. I also think the font size is a little bit too big for our heading, so I'm definitely going to decrease that one as well. So this is basically our heading. So I'm going to go to H1 and I'll say let's give this one an ID, and I am going to give it the ID of page heading. Now I'm going to target page heading once we reach anything below 1000 pixels, and I'm going to say font size is probably just 60 pixels from this point on, so it's getting a lot smaller. We're going to shrink the page, and I would say anything below 550 pixels should be the next breakpoint. So I'm just going to copy this media query. I'm going to change 1100 to 550 pixels, and we're going to replace our page heading, and we say okay, let's just give it 40 pixels of font size from this point on. Obviously it would also make sense to adjust the subheading right here, so I'm going to use this ID and give this to the H2 and say page subheading, and I'll also adjust the page subheading once we're below 550, and I'll say font size is probably 30 pixels. I'm not even sure if this is a lot smaller, so I'm going to go with 20 pixels. But this does not seem to change anything, so probably I didn't save this one. But yeah, as you can see, now it seems to work. And I think this looks a lot better already. And I also think at a certain point, those boxes are like literally unnecessary. They don't really give our page too much. And I think we can probably remove them by going to our box container or by using .box, which we already have. And we just say display none once we are below 550 pixels. And as you can see, now I'm above 550, I'm going below 550, and the box is basically getting removed. And I think up to probably 400 pixels, it still looks pretty good. And below that, we can probably say that we are going to make the font size of this one a little bit smaller and of this one as well. So let's go copy this one again. Let's say below 400. We are going to give this one a font size of maybe 80 and this one of 30. And this one can be removed. And now we have this effect. And there are barely any devices nowadays that are below 350 pixels, so this is definitely fine. The page looks pretty nice up to 350 pixels, and anything below does not really exist anymore, so it's fine. So let's target our nav bar, and I give this one the ID of nav container, and I give every single nav element an ID of nav item 1. So I copy this ID. This one will have an ID of nav item 2. This one will have an ID of nav item 3. And if you wonder why I'm using IDs, this is just because I want to have higher specificity so I can override the class styles, because I don't want them to conflict with the class styles. So now, first of all, I'm obviously having this nav container. So I'm going to target this one. Once we reach probably 800 pixels. Because as you can see, it looks pretty nice up to probably 750s. So I'm going to say add media screen and a max width of 750 pixels. And once I get below that, we're going to target the nav container. We say we have a gap of probably 15, let's say 10 pixels. So we are going to reduce the gap by a little bit. And now I'm also going to target our individual nav items by using hashtag nav item 1, hashtag nav item 2, hashtag nav item 3, and hashtag nav item 4. And now I'm also going to say padding is going to be just 0, because we don't really need padding anymore. And now, as you can see, the padding shrinks drastically, and I can probably give it a little bit more gap now since we don't have that much padding anymore. And it looks pretty good. And I'm also going to say every single nav item has a background of none. So we're just going to remove the background as well. And now we have this contact form, looks pretty good. Up to, I would say, approximately 450 pixels as well. So okay, we don't have 450 pixels. So what we are going to do is we're just going to target our nav container once again, and let's say we have a font size of, let's say, 15 pixels. Okay, this does not seem to affect anything, so we're going to target the different nav items. I was hoping that it would just inherit it, but it doesn't, so this is also a way that can basically work. What we're going to do now, I think this works, this looks pretty good, but we can probably even say that we're going to go with 17 pixels. Now let's just copy this. We're going to 400, whoops, and we say for 400 we are going down to 14 pixels, so it looks good on pretty much every single device. So this is the first breakpoint, second breakpoint, and now it looks good on pretty much every device up to 350 pixels, and this is what we are basically looking for. Now it would also make sense to give it a little bit more margin to the top once we get below 500 pixels, 550. So I would say that we're going to target our rocket again. I think it was the rocket, or what exactly was basically the wrapper? Okay, our header ID. So we are going to target our header ID once we get below 550 pixels. So hashtag header minus ID, and let's say margin top of 200 pixels, which is probably a lot, but yeah, we can probably go with 150, like so. Probably is still too much, 120. And I think this looks like really, really cool. So now we have this one approximately in the middle. We are going up, still looks pretty good, up, still looks pretty good, up, still looks pretty good, and it looks pretty much good on every single device. So now let's also take a look at the rest of the page. This one here looks pretty good. This is obviously interactive because we used a grid. Our plans look pretty good to me. Our contact form looks pretty good to me, but I think we have to adjust our contact form once we get below 550 pixels probably. So I'm going to take a look at our contact form right here. This one has an ID of contact already, and I think we have the width for our form container. So let's go, let's say width of our form container is 400 pixels right here. So as you can see, now it shrinks once we get to 550. Probably we should shrink it to 350 though, and we can also shrink it once again once we get to 400 to maybe 280. Let's take a look how this looks, and yeah, as you can see, this one looks pretty much alright to me, and this should work on pretty much every device. So it looks pretty good on a phone, and yeah, looks pretty good on every single device. And this is how we made it responsive. So now our website is basically done. We can scroll again, and we can write a contact form, topic, email, name, send a message, whatever. So guys, this is what the website looks like. Really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and yeah, hope you learned something. Feel free to comment and give me some ideas or suggestions what you would like to see next, and I hope you have a great day, and see you next time, guys.